Jesus said, "When the advocate comes, who I will send to you from the Father, the Spirit of truth who comes from the Father, he will testify on my behalf. You also are to testify because you have been with me from the beginning. I did not say these things to you from the beginning because I was with you. But now I am going to him who sent me. Yet none of you asked me, 'Where are you going?' But because I have said these things to you, sorrow has filled your hearts. Nevertheless, I tell you the truth. It is to your advantage that I go away. For if I do not go away, the advocate will not come to you. But if I go, I will send him to you. And when he comes, he will prove the world wrong about sin and righteousness and judgment. About sin, because they do not believe in me. About righteousness, because I am going to the Father and you will see me no longer. About judgment, because the ruler of this world has been condemned. I still have many things to say to you, but you cannot bear them now. When the Spirit of truth comes, he will guide you into all truth. For he will not speak on his own, but will speak whatever he hears, and he will declare to you the things that are to come. He will glorify me because he will take what is mine and declare it to you. All that the Father has is mine. For this reason, I said that he will take what is mine and declare it to you." This is the gospel of the Lord. You may be seated. A righteous man once said, "Faith isn't some constant state of belief, but rather a faithfulness, a loyalty to the moments when we've had faith." I want to say that again. Faith isn't some constant state of belief, but rather a faithfulness, a loyalty to the moments when we've had faith. I think that we should all ask ourselves, which moments of our lives, which stories, which experiences are the ones that our faith holds on to? I imagine that for the apostles who had seen and experienced many amazing moments during their few short years with Jesus, the story of Pentecost was definitely one of those moments. The moment of Pentecost, the moment when the rush of a mighty wind and tongues of fire illuminated the faith of those who gathered there that day. I mean, it had to have been. Because all these years later, we celebrate how that moment transformed the faith of the disciples from a group who were all gathered in one place, as it says at the beginning of our Acts reading, to the apostles who traveled near and far to proclaim the gospel, often at great peril to themselves. I mean, if that's not a life-defining moment of faith, I do not know what is. But what about you? What about me? Are there moments in our lives that we can point to on our best days and even our worst days and say, there it is. That is a moment that I can hold on to. A moment among all your moments of your life that has called you here to go on this journey we call faith. I mean, I'd love to spend the rest of the day hearing from all of you about a particular moment that you might have. But for the sake of time, why don't I share? Here's one of mine. The story takes place while I was studying and living in England, and a friend I made while I was over there asked if I would travel with him to the city of Lourdes, a city in southern France at the foothills of the Pyrenees Mountains, a holy city, because it is said in the mid-1800s, a young French girl by the name of Bernadette saw an apparition of Mary in the grottos beneath the mountains. At the time, I never heard of any of this before, but a trip to a small French city that sits right in the foothills of the Pyrenees make a perfect base camp to go hiking for a few days, so why not? My friend and I, we packed lightly and flew south from England and landed some 7 or 8 miles outside of the city of Lourdes. And eager to stretch our legs, and mostly because we were broke, we decided to just walk to the city. We made our journey through a number of tiny French towns, the 7 or 8 miles to the city itself. So when we finally made it, evening was closing in. And despite it being around summertime, we noticed something peculiar was happening, something quite odd. We didn't see anyone. Very few people, not many cars out on the streets. In a rather eerie silence, we found our way to the address of our hotel, an old historic building. And from what we could tell, we were the only people staying there. And the reason I say that is because we had to turn the lights on in the lobby when we entered. A little unnerved, but having some bread and wine, pâté and cheese, we were in France after all, that we brought, and not wanting to be cooped up in a creepy old hotel, we found an emergency door in a stairwell. We propped it open and climbed out onto the roof. And there we sat, watching the sunset over the mountains, having our light meal in the fresh French air. And that's when it happened. Amidst what we thought was silence, we started to hear a sound. Very faint, delicate, sounding as if it was brought to us on the very breeze and wind itself. And curious and almost without speaking with one another, we made our way off the roof and down to the streets. Still no people around, but there was this sound. We started to walk vainly towards the source, with the sound bouncing off the buildings. An old French city, there's no right angles, it's all loops and circles, and almost getting lost, we tried to pinpoint exactly where the sound was coming from. But as we meandered, we heard the sound. It was getting louder. We walked closer and closer until we realized that what we were hearing was singing and the sound of voices. But even still, we couldn't tell what was being sung or what was being said. And as we walked, evening had turned to night. And as we got closer, we did start to see a few more people around. Now from a number of different streets, people seemed to be walking the same way we were, in search of or because of that sound carried on the wind. Finally, the narrow streets, they opened up. And we found ourselves looking down at this great, immense square. And there in the middle of this great space, we found what we didn't even know we were looking for. On one side of the square, rising tall and grand above us, was this great, huge cathedral church. And in front of the church were hundreds of people. Hundreds of solitary flames of light among the heads that were bowed in prayer, making it look like little tongues of fire. And the prayer they were praying and singing, it was now unmistakable. Over and over again, the people were praying the rosary. Except it didn't always sound the same. Each time the prayer was said, it was in a different language. First French, then English, Spanish, German, Portuguese, Italian, Latin, Polish, Chinese, a few that I'm sure I don't remember. No matter which language was spoken, everyone kept praying. A cacophony of languages. The pilgrims there had traveled from all the corners of the world to come to the holy city of Lourdes. But in that moment, the differences of language or way of life, they faded away, and we stood there in a mostly empty, darkened city united by the power of the Holy Spirit in that place. There's two reasons why I wanted to tell this story to you today. And the first is what I said at the outset of this sermon. As you might imagine, this story is a moment that I always hold on to and I love to share with people. I mean, even as I look back on my story, it all seems too unbelievable to be true. I mean, come on, right? Southern France, snow-capped mountains, an empty, eerie city, a giant cathedral at night, a gathering of pilgrims by firelight that I stumbled upon as if called there by the Spirit. I mean, I was there, and it's still hard to believe. But I truly know that on my faithful days, and especially on my stumbling and bumbling days, this is a moment that I always try to remember, stay faithful to, a loyalty to this moment in time. And the second reason is this. If you couldn't tell from the way I told this story, to me, this is as close as I will get to being there that Pentecost day 2,000 years ago. And from feeling so close to that rush of wind and tongues of fire and cacophony of language, I do feel like I learned something about what Pentecost means that I might have otherwise missed. And what I learned was this. Sometimes we think that the takeaway from Pentecost is some sort of magic moment in the Bible. You know, when people were given a superpower, right? The ability to all of a sudden be able to be fluent in Portuguese or French. But the true gift of Pentecost is at the same time much more grand and much simpler than on-demand Google Translate. The amazing thing is not that the disciples could speak all of these different languages, just as I didn't all of a sudden become fluent in German in that square that evening. And yet, I knew and I understood what it was that people were praying there that night. I mean, listen again to what our Bible says. How is it that each of us, that we hear each of us in our own native language? It's not speaking, but it is understanding each other. That is the true gift from God on Pentecost. And isn't that just it? This is what the gift of faith ultimately gives us. All of our moments. If we took the time and I asked everyone in this room to stand up and share a moment of faithfulness that they're holding on to, we would get a wide variety of experiences, from candlelit cathedrals in France to small, tender, quiet moments of God's grace known only to ourselves. But we would be able to hear and understand these moments for what they are for one another. Moments when we've known that there's something beyond ourselves at work in the universe. Our faith would allow us to share that with each other. No matter what has brought you this far on your journey of faith, know that this is the language that we share. It's the language of faith that let me know exactly what all those people were doing and saying in that Basilica Square without actually knowing what language they were speaking. And it's the same gift that lets you know that despite the differences we have in this room, differences of experiences, differences of opinion, differences on our faith journeys, in an age of heightened differences, we share a faith that breaks down those walls with a rush of Pentecostal wind. Amen.